5 times World Champion Alan Scotthorne. He's fishing a pole at 13 metres. Got a nice little rig on, one of the floats he designed for us. And he's knocking out some little crucians and the occasional little tench. And Alan is very, very fussy about all his tackle, as you would imagine. And he's got trays and trays of these rigs, just like this beautiful stuff here. This includes some AS3s, a slimline rugby ball shaped design with a carbon stem, and he's fishing a 0.4 gram one at the moment now. Yeah,
I'm fishing 0.4 in about sort of 5 maybe 6 foot of water.
Okay, but now whereas Alan not only designed the floats, he designed the rigs, he don't trust us to make his rigs for him. He's got to tie up all his own like this to his pristine standards. The nearest we can get to it in mass production are these, and there's a whole range of them, different floats and what have you, but all the rigs have been designed by Alan. I now want him to put one of these on and show us exactly what he does to modify it, or rather what you should do to check it out before you actually fish a rig that's bought over the counter in the shop. What you got on there, is that an AS4?
No, this is an AS3, it's same.
Okay, and you blacked out the tip in that?
It's one that I've just blacked out, yeah, just with a felt tip pen. I mean,
okay.
The tips on these floats are roller, and when the light shines on them, you know, the light shines through them. But of course, when you get white water like we've got in front of us here, a black top is ideal because you can see the black against the white background.
It's amazing how visible it is. We can't sell black top floats; they have to be coloured. If I give you a new AS3 that's 0.4, straight out of the packet.
Right.
Let's see what you do with this. This is your design after all. So if there's anything wrong with it.
Yeah, I mean, the rigs are quite simple in themselves. There's plenty of information on the actual winder. The information of what size line it is. This is just an 015 mainline rig, which is ideal for this type of fishing because you can change the hook length that's on there. I mean, there's an 011/7 hook length on it, which is nearly an 012 hook length.
Yeah, so that's on the itemised on the packet, but it's on the winder as well, which is quite important. Yeah. So you can put rigs back on their original winder if they survive that long.
Yeah, it's good because you know exactly what's on there.
And in my terminology, that's 3.8 pound main line or rig line and 2.5 pound hook length. Yeah. And that's to an 18 barbless silverfish maggot. What were you on your rig? Was that 16 or 18?
That was 16 on that. Okay. I mean, as match anglers, we tend to talk now more in diameters. I mean, obviously a 3.8 main line at 015, as we'd call it, is still a strong. Yeah. A strong main line. I mean, you can put an 015 hook length to that as well if you were catching like some bigger fish, maybe an odd carp or a bigger tench mixed in.
In this circumstance out here, although you're catching little crucians, next to the lilies, you will hook the odd big tench. So
yeah, and I've had one reasonable tench, and you know, when you hook a fish like that, you don't want the main line to sort of let you down. Right. The first thing to do, once you take the actual float off the winder, you can see that the line above it, because it's 015 and it's been actually wrapped round the winder, it's kinked slightly.
Yeah.
So the first thing to do is actually straighten that line out above the float.
Right, and you're running your thumb down it, generating a bit of pressure and stretching it.
Yeah, I mean, I've got quite greasy fingers as well, which, I mean, it just allows you to straighten that line out above the float. And also, then if you just give it a bit of a tug below the actual float as well, then that just straightens everything out. The hook lengths on these rigs are made just the same length as what the actual winder is, so the hook length hasn't got a kink in it at all. It's dead straight, which I think that's quite important.
Yeah, I agree. I think what's most important is that the twin loops, we've got some aircraft overhead at the moment, the twin loops don't go round the top of the winder, because if you put a kink in the monofilament itself, you ain't got too much of a problem. But if you put a kink in the two loops as it goes around the corner, that's difficult to straighten out.
The hook it's a silverfish maggot. It's a barbless hook, which is very fine, slightly flattered. It's a hook that I use when I'm fishing with casters, little pieces of worms, maggots. A lot of baits can be used with this hook, and of course coupled with an 0.11/7 close to 0.12 hook length, it's quite a strong bit of kit for catching a lot of silverfish.
Right.
To put it on the actual pole, I always just put the hook, because you've got the hook already on the rig, I can put the hook on the base of the actual pole, run the rig up the pole by keeping everything straight, and know that
well, you've already
this pole top's
plumbed
long
up.
enough. Yeah.
Yeah, so you know roughly from your established rigs what your depth is, but normally you would plumb up on that, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
With excess line and then get it back to size.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, you can just put that loop straight onto the connector and plumb up. I mean, you've got 3.5 meters of line, which most commercial fisheries that we fish are within that sort of depth.
Yeah.
I mean, they're all quite shallow type fisheries. So 3.5 meters of line allows you to fish with this float anywhere that you wanted, really. I already know that it's within the bounds of the top kit that I'm fishing. So what I'm going to do is just make a loop at the top of the rig. Now I use a Sensus loop tire for virtually all the loops that I make. And the reason for this, because I can make a very, very strong loop. A Sensus loop tire, I just put it into I make a loop with the main line.
Okay, just double it over on itself and
yeah,
hold the loop. Yeah.
Double it over, hold the loop together, place the loop tire in and twist once, twice, 3 times, which is an extremely strong knot. And then once that's put together, then you can see I've got quite a long knot.
Yeah, it's quite a barrel, isn't it?
Right, I'm just going to connect then. All I have is a single loop, and I connect through the actual loop that I've made. I make another loop, pass that through, and pass it over the Dacron connector and pull that down to the actual knot.
If you put that back in, will you replumb or will you set that to the depth of your established rigs?
No, I'd never do that. I'd set the float roughly at what I want and then replumb. And there's a reason for that. If you've got certainly different size elastics, and if I were to use the same rig on a yellow bungee, because there's more pressure from a yellow bungee on the line, it stretches the main line. So every rig that I set up, I always plumb the depth with.
What, even over that distance of like 5 foot you're fishing?
It's amazing.
So you're talking about the differential in the stretch of the monofilament over 5 foot?
Yes.
Go on.
Well, I can demonstrate. If I actually pull
well,
on
it can't be more than about an inch, but that's critical,
right,
is it?
If you look at that and I pull the line, I can put that virtually all the way back in.
Okay, all right.
So the stretch on the line, when you're fishing, when you're wanting to fish dead depth, when you're fishing with tiny pieces of worms or pellets, and any baits like that, and you're wanting to be absolutely dead depth, it's crucial that you plumb up every time you use a rig.
All right.
One thing that I would do, Peter, I would probably move the rubber at the base of the float. There's 3 rubbers on the carbon stem. I would move that bottom rubber just down slightly. I'd like probably an inch and a quarter below the actual stem. So I've just checked to make sure it is. The reason for this, when I first started fishing for carp put a lot of pressure and tension as well on the actual float. If you've actually got a bodied float, if I take one of my rigs, a bodied rig, you can imagine when you've got a bodied float like that, the amount of pressure on the line, if you push that rubber right tight up underneath the float.
Oh, I see.
You're creating then an arc to that.
Asking the line to cut into the float body.
What it actually does, it puts an horrendous amount of pressure on the line at the eye.
Yeah.
And you can get broke on the eye of the float if you have the rubber tight underneath the float.
So you're moving the rubber away and shallowing the angle of the line.
That's exactly what I'm
making
doing.
Making the line avoid cutting into the body.
Yeah.
Those bodies are very tough anyway. The line don't cut into them. The paint is like a sort of eggshell finish. It's really hard on there. And
it is fantastic paint. I mean, I've got some floats that I've probably used as many as 20, 25 times.
Right.
It's probably not a good selling point, to be honest, Peter.
They're meant to be as durable as we can make them.
They certainly are. Now, the other thing to do, once you've got your rig set up, is the main part of the rig is the hook. If that hook lets you down, you can lose the fish. So what I'd do is just check. Bear in mind, I've not actually whipped this hook. So a young woman in your firm will have whipped this hook. I just check the hook, just give it a tug and make sure that the whipping is tight up to the spade of the hook.
Right.
Everything's perfect, everything's in place. So now I'm ready to plumb up. So I always use a quite heavy plummet, about 20 grams.
Okay.
With a cork base. It can't damage the actual hook or anything. And all I can do then is just ship out and plumb up the rig. Now, I've already fished this swim for an hour or so I have a rough idea on the actual depth. But that should, I would have thought, be about bang depth, maybe just slightly over depth even. Oh, look at that, that is absolutely plumb depth, but that's with the line tight. So again,
okay,
you're slightly stretching the line. You can just about make out that bristle, so I just want to put a little bit more on. It is important when you're using an heavy plummet to allow the float to relax in the water, because you do get stretch, and when you've got an heavy plummet on, that little bit of stretch, you can finish up fishing slightly off bottom.
So you move that about 2 inches?
Yeah. And I'm wanting to fish, because I'm going to fish with pellets and little tiny bits of worms, I want to be fishing almost bang depth. But bang depth it's when the float is relaxed in the water. You can see that, I can tighten that float up, but once I relax the line, that float, everything is set absolutely bang depth.
Okay, I thought I was being critically accurate, but I haven't been accurate to these standards.
Right, what I'd probably do then is shorten the line fractionally. Right, I like to have a roundabout sort of maybe 2 foot to 2'6" a line above. So I'd probably just shorten the line just a little bit. Okay. But just to save on time, I'm going to leave that.
Does that vary with conditions, wind and all that sort of thing?
Yeah, wind and conditions make a massive difference. I don't like to fish with really short lines unless conditions is absolutely perfect. I like to fish with a couple of foot of line above the rig at least.
And that diffuses any of your pole movement?
Yeah, if you've got a crosswind on, like we've got a skimming wind today, you could add back shots above this rig, shorten the line slightly and add a couple of back shots. Okay. The next thing to do then is check the actual loading of the rig. I mean, these shots have been put on. I wouldn't have thought the float has actually been tested in the water, because
we can't do it individually.
It's impossible, yeah.
You've got a little bit of variation in the buoyancy, minute, but you've also got a tiny bit of variation in the shot. Yeah. They're not absolutely uniform. Yeah. So, and the one thing we have to do is we have to ride on the tip. So, you know, if we take one of these, we would have to be where the tip joins the body to be on the safe side. Yeah.
So I've plumbed up, I've got the rig set at dead depth. All I'm going to do now is ship out and just check that that rig is set to what I want. Personally, I like to fish with probably about 1 centimetre of bristle showing. Not a lot more. I tend to fish very, very low in the water. Now, again, this rig has come straight off at Winder, and you can already see, you could almost fish with that as it is, Peter, couldn't you? If you were fishing...
I would, yeah, but you think, what, are you thinking you might trim that?
I would just trim that. Really? With maybe a couple of number 13s.
I need my other glasses if you're going to do that.
I think if it were blacked in, you'd probably see it would against white water here, and that's one reason why I black in. Now what I'd do is, my trimming shots I'd put away from the actual block of shot. I like to once my shotting's set up as I want it, that's what it is, it's a bulk and 2 droppers, just a standard rig for fishing with pellets and worms, what I'd do is just put a couple of number 13s mid-rig, because these don't affect anything at all. So I could still put number 13s on even though I've got my glasses on, Peter.
Well, that's remarkable. I struggle with them.
So what I've done, I've just put 2 number 13s mid-rig. They're out of the way, they're not going to affect the bottom end of the rig or anything, and I can just check that again. I suppose that's me being a little bit picky, but what you often find when you've been fishing with a float a little while, because you've got grease on your fingers and everything else, them trimming shot, if the float starts to dot down even more, you can just remove one of them trimming shot as well. I mean, for me, that rig now is set absolutely perfect, and all we've added is 2 13s.
Okay.
So we're now ready to fish.
And the weight of the bait won't affect that in any way. Obviously with maggot and little tiny bits of worm section and things like that, that won't affect it.
No, because you're fishing with the bait on the bottom, the weight of the bait sits on the bottom, so it's difficult for it to affect the actual rig at all. I mean, all I'm fishing with is just a tiny little worm head, which is the same size as a caster. You know, you fish with a caster, I'm just putting a tiny piece of worm on just to try and catch the crucians and tench. So we'll just go out and see if I can catch one on this Drennan ready-made rig.
So if for convenience you're into shop-bought rigs, whatever rigs you buy, go through the procedure that Alan did, take them off the winder, straighten out the kinks that are inherent from being wound on there, test the hook, test the float for shotting, set it up all dead right, and you can catch some fish.